In the previous session, we were introduced the concept of vectors and pixels. In this session, we will be familiar with the concept of composition and learn how to make a composition. But the question you may ask yourself is, what is composition? A composition is a container that stores layers of artwork, video, audio, text, and etc. in a timeline. This is where you create your animation and where you spend most of your time while hanging out in After Effects. In fact, the composition in After Effects is what is finally rendered, and you can see the final animation outside of the After Effects environment. Rendering is the process of turning your animated composition into a movie file that can be viewed outside of After Effects. We will talk about rendering and the render queue window in the future sessions. Creating a composition in After Effects is like creating a new file in Photoshop or Illustrator. As we saw in the previous session, we created a new file and we were able to draw this line in it. Exactly for After Effects, we need such a file, which we call composition. There are 4 ways to create a composition in After Effects. The easiest and best way is to click on the New Composition button in the middle of the screen. This will open the Composition Settings window. The second way is to select the New Composition option from the Composition menu. The Composition Settings window opens again. Another way is to click Create a New Composition in the Project window. The fourth way is to use Ctrl-N in Windows and Command-N in Mac. These shortcuts are also used in other Adobe programs such as Photoshop or Illustrator to create a new project. So I suggest you remember these shortcuts and use it to create a new composition in After Effects. By all these methods I mentioned, the Composition Settings window will open. In the Composition Name section, you can choose a name for your project. You see Comp 1 by default. If I click OK and create a new composition again, the name Comp 2 will appear in the name field. For example, I type the new comp name. There are a number of settings here that we will discuss in detail. In the preset section, we have ready-made settings that we can choose any of them. For example, HDTV 1080-25 means that the size of our video is HD 1080, which its width is 1920 and its height is 1080. And this composition will be made with a frame rate of 25 frames per second. In other words, every 25 frames in After Effects is equal to 1 second. Frame rate is determined by broadcast system, which varies from country to country. Depending on which country you live in, there are different broadcast systems that fall into 2 categories, NTSC and PAL, which we will talk more about. But you will see that each of presets you choose has a different width, height, and frame rate. For example, 720 means HD video, and 1080 means Full HD video. 4K is twice the size of Full HD 1080 video. For a better understanding, look at this picture. As you can see, the 720p video is 2080 pixels in width and 720 pixels in height. Now if we select the HD 720 in After Effects, we will see that its width is 2080 and its height is 720 pixels. Full HD is 9020 in width and 1080 in height. You can see all these settings as a preset in After Effects. 4K videos are twice the size of Full HD videos. That is, their width is 3840 pixels and its height is about 2160 pixels. But in this image, the wrong width is written. Now if you select the 4K option from the preset section, you will see that it's twice the size of Full HD video. We will now explain the terms NTSC and PAL in the After Effects. NTSC stands for National Television System Committee. The NTSC system is used for countries such as United States, Canada, and Japan that use the 110-volt power system. In these countries, they use electricity with a frequency of 60 Hz. PAL stands for Phase Alternation by Line and is used in countries with 220 volts. For example, in Europe, Asia, Africa, Australia, and etc. In these countries, they use electricity with a frequency of 50 Hz. I don't want to get deep into electricity, but just remember, if we divide the frequency by 2, we get the frame rate of the country where you live in. For example, in Europe, where the power system is 220 volts and 50 Hz, if we divide 50 by 2, the frame rate will be 25 frames per second. And in the United States, where the power system is 110 volts and 60 Hz, if we divide 60 by 2, the frame rate will be 30 frames per second. So as a general rule, we can say that the NTSC system works at a frame rate of 30 frames per second, and the PAL system works at the frame rate of 25 frames per second. So if you live in countries like Europe, Asia, Africa, or Australia, just like me, and you want to create a motion graphic, it is better to choose a frame rate of 20 frames per second. But if you live in countries like the US, Canada, or Japan, it is better to choose a frame rate of 30 frames per second. Of course, 29.97 frames per second is equal to 30 frames per second and is not much different. You can also select a frame rate of 30 frames per second from this section, but it's not necessary. So these presets are a series of ready-made settings to choose from according to the size of the composition and frame rate that you want to create your motion graphics. And you don't need to make these settings manually. However, you can also select these settings manually. For example, imagine that you want to create a motion graphic for Instagram. This way you can enter 1080 plus 1080 size for video width and height. If the log aspect ratio is enabled, the height will change as the width changes. If you want to enter the width and height separately, uncheck the log aspect ratio. By doing this, we can enter the desired size for width and height. If you pay attention to the presets, you will see that the costume has been selected because we have entered our desired size. If I check the log aspect ratio option, if I change the width, you will see that the height will also change automatically. But if you just want to change the width and keep the height constant, uncheck this option. The pixel aspect ratio section specifies the shape of pixels in the composition, which is a square by default. You shouldn't change this value in any way. If you change this option and place it on the widescreen, for example, the ratio of pixels in composition will also change, and the composition size will be larger than what you selected. So I suggest leaving it at the default square pixel. If we open the Photoshop program and zoom in on the line we created in the previous session, you will see that this line also consists of series of square pixels. In After Effects, shapes and backgrounds are created from these square pixels. You are familiar with the concept of frame rate and realize that if you live in countries with 220 volts power system, we should use a frame rate of 20 frames per second. And if you live in countries with 110 volts, you should use a frame rate of 30 frames per second, or 29.97 frames per second. The resolution section includes several options such as full, half, third, and quarter. This section actually specifies the preview resolution of objects, backgrounds, and so on. For example, suppose you import a high-quality image from Illustrator into After Effects, which is large and takes a long time to preview in the composition. So this way, you can select half and preview it with half quality. Again, if you see that the preview is taken too late, you can set it to third or quarter. Just remember that the quality settings in this section has no effect on the final quality of the video being rendered and delivered to the customer. In other words, these qualities are only for preview mode in After Effects. And to adjust the final quality of the video, we have to change some settings in the render queue section, which we will talk about in future sessions. In the start time code section, we can specify the start time of composition. By default, the start time always starts from 0, which you can adjust to your liking. For example, suppose you want to start from 5 seconds instead of 0. So I select the second part and type 5. So this way we can specify the start time of the timeline. I set it to 0 again to start the timeline from 0. In the duration section, you can also specify the duration of the timeline. For example, suppose you want to make 1-minute animation. So you have to select 1 minute here. How to read these numbers is like a digital clock. In digital clocks, the two numbers on the right indicate seconds. The next two digits indicate minutes, and the next two digits indicate hours. The same is true for After Effects, except that the smaller unit in After Effects is frame. As I explained before, every 25 frames in After Effects equal 1 second. Therefore, the two numbers on the right in After Effects represent the frame. The next two numbers represent the second. The next two numbers represent the minute. And finally, the last number represents the hour. So if you want to create a composition that lasts 1 minute, there are two ways. The hard way is to select these two numbers and type 0, and then enter 1 in the minute field. The easiest way is to delete all these numbers. Suppose you want your composition to last 1 minute. Type 1, then type 0. Now if you pay attention to this part, you will see that our whole composition is 10 frames. Type another 0. We now have 1 second composition. Enter another 0. And you will see that we have a 10-second composition. And if I put another 0 again, you will see that we have created a 1-minute composition. So if you want to create a 1-minute composition, you can enter 10,000. Of course, there is no need to memorize these numbers. With a little practice, you can master this. If you look in front of this box, we can see how long our composition lasts. Now suppose we want to create a composition that takes 1 minute and 30 seconds. Enter 13 and put a few zeros. Now create a composition that takes 1 minute and 45 seconds. The two zeros to the right represent the frames. 45 represent the second and 1 represent the minute. So we can easily create our composition with any duration. In the background color section, we can also set the background color, which is black by default. If I select this dropper tool, I can select any color in the environment as a background color. Move your mouse and you will see that wherever you go, you can copy the color of that part. For example, I can select this green, or this blue, or even this red. You can even click on it and choose one of the millions of colors in the After Effects as a background color. You can see the selected color from the top. Suppose I select green and click OK. Now if I click OK, you will see that the new composition will be created with the above settings. As you can see, a new composition named New Comp is created. This is the name we entered in the composition settings window. You can also see this name at the top of the project window. The composition is made with a specification of 1080 in width and 1080 in height, and duration of 1 minute and 45 seconds and 25 frames per second. You can see the green background color in the middle. In the layer section, the name of our new composition is specified. If you look closely at the timeline, you can see that my composition was made in 1 minute and 45 seconds. So we can apply any settings we like in the composition setting window. Now suppose you want to make a change to the composition you created. For example, imagine we choose the composition size incorrectly. Do we have to make a new composition? The answer is no. You can easily edit the same composition. There are several ways to do this. The first method is to click on the composition in project window and select composition settings from the composition menu. The composition settings shortcut is Ctrl-K. Memorize these shortcuts because they are so useful. Now we can apply any changes we like. For example, set the composition size to HDTV 1080-25 and click OK. The size of my composition was changed to Full HD video, and you can see the new size at the top of project window. The second way to open the composition setting window is using Ctrl-K shortcuts. And the last way is right-click on the composition and select the composition setting option. With these three methods, you can open the composition setting window and apply your changes. But my suggestion is to use shortcut keys. The further you go and the more professional you become, the more important it becomes to use shortcuts. So I suggest you memorize the shortcut keys and use them in the right place.